makes sense and feels right? Do you ever wish you had something useful to help you sort out what you want so that you could decide what to do? This is the story of how Jess used some decision tools to help her plan her class schedule. Jess will be a junior next year, which means that in addition to her core courses, she'll be able to take one elective. The question is, which one? When her best friend Leah asked if she figured out her courses yet, Jess replied, "I can't make up my mind." So here's the problem. Jess loves drawing and would like to take an art class, but she's worried that it'll seem a little lame when she applies to college. She could take something like computer science, which would look good, but she doesn't think it'd be much fun. To help her decide, Jess sketches out the pros and cons of taking an art class. This helps Jess collect her thoughts, but she still doesn't know what to do. So she decides to get some input from her parents. Her mom says, "I don't think a fine arts class is such a bad idea." Her dad says, "Me either. It would be a good way to show your flair and develop your interests and abilities." "But have you thought about taking Intro to Computer as preparation for a future graphic arts class?" "Or what about taking that current events seminar we heard about at Back to School Night?" Jess is glad she talked to her parents, but now she has even more possibilities in her head. If anything, she feels that she's further from a decision than she was before. She decides to share her situation with Mr. Jones, a teacher that she knows and trusts. Mr. Jones says, "So, how are you thinking about this decision, Jess?" Jess shows Mr. Jones the pro-con list she made for art and explains that she has 2 other courses she's also considering. "Good idea to use a pro-con list to help figure out what you want or don't want from a decision. But with several alternatives, like you have, there's another tool that might be even more useful." Mr. Jones shows Jess how to use weight and rate tables to capture her thinking and help determine which alternative should get her the most of what she wants. She begins by listing her 3 alternatives: art, current events, and computers. She uses her pro-con list to help identify the 3 things that are important to her: enjoyment of the class, how it will look on her college applications, and the chance to learn something new and interesting. "Great," says Mr. Jones. "But let me ask you, are all 3 of these things equally important to you?" "No," says Jess. "Then you need to weight your preferences. Think about how important each preference is to you. You might want to rank them in order of importance. Assume all your preferences together total 100%. Then think about what percent, or how big of a piece of the total pie, each of your preferences should get, and write down those numbers." Jess says enjoyment is most important to her, but not that much more important than her college application because it will be junior year. Learning something new comes last, because while it might be a great opportunity to learn and grow, she's not sure that's a good reason to take a course. Now let's give each of your alternatives a score on a scale from 1 to 10 on how much of what you will get for each preference. For example, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most enjoyable class you ever took, and 1 being the least enjoyable, how much enjoyment do you think you would get from taking art? "I love art," says Jess, "so at least an 8. "And computers? How enjoyable would you find that?" "Computers," says Jess. "I'd say maybe a 2. "Okay," says Mr. Jones. "Now go ahead and fill in the rest of the table for your other preferences in the same way." Jess fills in the table. She thinks that art would be a 3 for college applications and a 2 for learning something new. Computers would be a 9 for college applications and a 7 for learning something new. But what about current events? Even though she doesn't really know much about that class, she takes a stab at it anyway. Jess likes to follow the news, so she thinks it deserves a 6 for enjoyment. She thinks that it will look good on her transcript, so she gives it a 7 for college applications. And since she already watches the news every day, she only gives it a 3 for learning something new. Now that she has all her information together, Jess multiplies the weight by the rating for each class, and then she adds up each course's column to find its total value. According to the weight and rate table, the alternative with the greatest value is current events, which comes as a surprise to Jess. She's also surprised to find out that art and computers were almost equal. Mr. Jones asks her, "Does that help?" And Jess says, "Well, sort of. The numbers add up, but I'm still not sure about taking current events. Something doesn't feel quite right." "Ah," says Mr. Jones, "then you have more work to do."